A well-dressed couple walks into an upscale restaurant, their entrance barely causing a ripple in the polished, serene atmosphere. Jamal, tall and confident in a tailored navy suit, and Elena, poised and elegant in a classic dress, seem like any other well-heeled patrons. The restaurant, a place known for its exclusive clientele and impeccable service, is filled with the hum of quiet conversations, the clink of glasses, and the soft swish of waiters moving with practiced ease. But not all eyes are on them. Greg, a waiter in his mid-30s, glances at them as they step through the door, his expression hardening the moment they arrive. Without a word, he quickly assesses them, his gaze lingering a moment too long on their attire. They don't fit the mold of the usual guests. He's seen them before. The type of people who dress simply, who don't wear the right labels, who aren't fancy enough for a place like this. Without thinking, he makes a snap judgment. A barely audible mutter escapes his lips. "Sorry, we don't serve your kind here," as he looks away, clearly irritated. But what Greg doesn't know is that Jamal and Elena aren't just any customers. They are the owners of this very restaurant chain, the ones who made this elegant establishment what it is today. And tonight, they are about to teach him a lesson in humility he'll never forget. What started as an assumption based on appearance will soon become an unforgettable revelation. The restaurant stood as a beacon of sophistication and exclusivity. Situated on the corner of a bustling city block, its glass windows revealed a carefully curated world inside, a world of white linen tables, glowing chandeliers, and polished wood accents. The air was filled with the soft murmur of hushed conversations, punctuated by the occasional clink of fine china. Waiters dressed in sharp black uniforms moved with a practiced elegance, their steps quiet but precise. Every inch of the space seemed designed to cater to a clientele that valued more than just a good meal. It was an experience. Jamal and Elena walked through the double doors with the quiet grace of people who were comfortable in their own skin. They had been to many upscale restaurants like this, but today, they weren't here as regular customers. They had worked hard to build their business from the ground up. What many didn't know, however, was that they owned not just this restaurant, but a chain of others scattered across the city. Their company had expanded rapidly, becoming one of the most well-known names in the fine dining industry. But they still maintained a low profile. They didn't need to flaunt their success. They let their work speak for itself. They were dressed simply, as they always did when visiting their establishments. Jamal in a sleek tailored navy suit, and Elena in a minimalist black dress that radiated sophistication without trying too hard. Their presence, though, was impossible to ignore. As they made their way into the lobby, their quiet confidence seemed to radiate out into the room, making others take notice. However, their entrance didn't go unnoticed in the way they had hoped. The hostess, who had greeted every other customer with a practiced warmth, paused for a moment when she saw them. Her smile faltered for just an instant, before she quickly regained her composure and glanced down at the reservation list. There was an uncertainty in her eyes that Jamal caught immediately. He knew what it was. She hadn't expected them. She hadn't recognized them. Despite the cool reception, Elena remained poised, a small smile on her face as they were shown to their table. They sat in the corner, a quiet spot that offered them a perfect view of the entire room. The clink of silverware and the soft hum of conversation surrounded them. Yet there was an unspoken tension that had begun to settle in the air, a subtle shift that both Jamal and Elena could feel. They had become accustomed to being treated with respect, but tonight there was something different, something off. As they began to settle in, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would force them to confront the hidden prejudices that lurked just beneath the polished surface of the restaurant's reputation. And then Greg the waiter appeared. The moment Greg arrived at their table, Jamal and Elena exchanged a brief look, a silent understanding passing between them. He was an average waiter, young, a little too eager, with a hint of arrogance in the way he carried himself. His crisp white shirt and black apron were perfectly in place, but there was something about his demeanor that didn't quite match the polished atmosphere of the restaurant. "Good evening," Greg said, his voice strained in an effort to sound professional, but there was an edge to it. "What can I get you to drink?" Jamal smiled, his tone calm and collected. "I'll have the Cabernet Sauvignon, the 2018 vintage. Elena?" Elena glanced up from the menu, her smile warm but guarded. "I'll have sparkling water, please." Greg nodded curtly, his eyes quickly scanning them both, his gaze lingering a moment too long on their clothing. Jamal and Elena weren't in the most expensive designer brands, though they were far from being poorly dressed. Yet, in Greg's eyes, Something about them didn't quite fit with the restaurant's elite clientele. He made an instant judgment, one based purely on appearances. He turned to leave, but before he could take more than a few steps, Elena's voice stopped him. "Excuse me, I don't believe we've been properly introduced," she said, her tone polite but with an unmistakable firmness behind it. "I'm Elena, and this is my partner Jamal." Greg turned back, the surprise barely concealed on his face. "I'm Greg," he said, forcing a smile. "Is everything to your liking so far?" Elena, sensing the tension in the air, remained composed. "So far, yes. But we'd like to speak with you for a moment." There was an awkward pause. Greg tilted his head slightly, a frown creeping onto his face. Of course. What seems to be the problem?" Jamal, keeping his voice level, answered before Elena could. "We've noticed the way you've been acting toward us. Your tone, your assumptions. It's not subtle." Greg's face twitched, his unease showing through. "I don't know what you mean," he said, though the defensiveness in his voice was clear. "You've treated us differently," Jamal continued, his calm demeanor unwavering. "From the moment we sat down, you've made it obvious that you didn't think we belonged here." Elena gave him a small, knowing smile. "We're accustomed to this type of treatment, unfortunately. But we thought you might be different." Greg's eyes darted back and forth, clearly caught off guard. His usual bravado started to waver. "I'm just doing my job," he muttered, a weak defense. "I didn't mean to offend you." "It's not about intent," Elena said softly, her voice laced with wisdom. "It's about the assumption you made before you even spoke to us, before you even knew who we were." But the words hit harder than Greg expected. He could feel the heat of his own embarrassment rising in his chest. He had made assumptions based on appearances, decisions made without thinking, judgments based purely on what he saw. There was a long, tense silence before Greg muttered something unintelligible and began to walk away. But Elena wasn't finished yet. She didn't let him escape with an easy exit. "We're not done yet," Elena called out. "We'll be speaking to your manager about this." Greg froze, his back to them now. He didn't turn around, but the weight of her words settled on his shoulders. It was clear now. He had underestimated them, and it wasn't going to be as simple as he had hoped to brush off his behavior. He could feel the eyes of other diners watching, their quiet curiosity intensifying. The unspoken tension in the room had shifted, and it was now clear that the story unfolding at this table wasn't just about dinner. As Greg disappeared behind the kitchen doors, Elena and Jamal exchanged another glance. It was more than just a moment of discomfort. It was a realization, one that would soon come to a head in a way Greg never saw coming. A few minutes later, the manager, Mr. Caldwell, arrived at the table. He was a tall man in his mid-40s, well-groomed and wearing a suit that screamed professionalism. He had the air of someone who was used to handling delicate situations with tact and grace. He approached Jamal and Elena with a forced smile, though his eyes flickered with uncertainty. "I understand there's an issue here," Mr. Caldwell said, his voice calm but with a hint of tension. "Greg informed me that you had a problem with the service." Jamal met his gaze, unflinching. "It's not about the service, Mr. Caldwell. It's about how we were treated the moment we walked in. Your waiter made assumptions based on our appearance, and that's not acceptable." Elena nodded in agreement. "We've been more than patient, but it's clear that the treatment we've received here wasn't just accidental." Mr. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. "I assure you, that's not how we do things here. Greg is a good employee. There must have been some misunderstanding." Jamal's expression remained stoic. "You see, Mr. Caldwell, it's not a misunderstanding. We own this restaurant chain. It's ours." The words hit like a thunderclap. Mr. Caldwell's face drained of color, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment he was speechless, caught between disbelief and realization. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Excuse me," he stammered. Jamal reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a business card. He handed it to the manager, who stared at it, then back at Jamal and Elena, now realizing the gravity of his mistake. The silence that followed was deafening. The tension in the room was palpable as Mr. Caldwell stared at the business card in his hand, his face flushed with embarrassment. He struggled to process the reality of the situation, his thoughts racing as he tried to find the right words. His eyes flickered between the card and the couple sitting before him, their calm and unwavering demeanor now strikingly different from the discomfort he had felt earlier. This wasn't just an issue of service. It was about respect, dignity, and assumptions. I am so sorry, Mr. Caldwell finally managed, his voice thick with regret. I had no idea. This is completely unacceptable. Jamal and Elena exchanged a brief glance, and for a moment the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. Elena's expression softened, though there was still a sharpness in her eyes. We're not looking for an apology, Mr. Caldwell. We're looking for change. What happened here tonight is a reflection of a deeper issue, one that goes beyond one employee. It's about the culture you allowed to exist in this restaurant. Jamal nodded in agreement. It's about making sure that every guest who walks through these doors, regardless of their background, feels welcomed and valued. This isn't just about us. It's about making sure that no one else ever experiences what we did tonight. The room fell silent again as Mr. Caldwell absorbed their words. The weight of the truth seemed to settle on him. The realization that his restaurant, his establishment, was built on an unspoken exclusivity that had allowed such behavior to fester. I understand, he said finally, his voice quieter now but sincere. I'll address this immediately. We'll make sure that something like this never happens again. Elena smiled, her demeanor no longer as guarded. We hope that's true, Mr. Caldwell. We'll be keeping an eye on how things change. With that, the couple stood to leave. As they made their way toward the exit, the other diners watched with curiosity, some glancing nervously at Greg, who had been standing at the bar, clearly aware of what had just transpired. His face was red, his shoulders tense. He knew he had made a grave mistake, and the consequences of his actions were just beginning to sink in. Jamal and Elena didn't look back as they left the restaurant, but the impact of their words, of their revelation, would linger long after they had gone. In the quiet aftermath, Mr. Caldwell stood in place, holding the business card in his hand, a man confronted with the need for change in a place he had long considered his domain. The restaurant would never be the same. The story of Jamal and Elena's experience highlights a powerful truth. Appearances can be deceiving, and judgment based on them can have far-reaching consequences. In a world where assumptions often shape our interactions, it's crucial to recognize the value of respect and humility in every situation. The lesson here isn't just about standing up for oneself in the face of discrimination, but also about the importance of changing the culture around us, whether in a restaurant, a workplace, or our personal lives. True progress comes when we challenge ingrained biases and commit to treating every person with dignity, regardless of how they may appear on the outside.